Hello, you are watching Lit with Lloyd, and I am your host, Lloyd Russell. Today we have a special treat on a couple of different levels. First of all, we have New York Times best-selling author and award-winning narrator, Barry Eisler. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thanks for coming. And also, this is going to be our very first podcast in which we have a studio audience. So studio audience, let's hear it for Barry, huh?
Thank you.
Okay, this is great.
I know, all podcasts should be this way.
All right, let's get to the most important thing first. The narration. How did you get into narrating, and have you narrated all of your books?
Second question first. I have now narrated all my books, 18 novels and 4 short stories. And how did I get into it? I think there's a good life lesson in here. I always try to turn these things into not just, well, I did this, but things that can be useful for other people. I love audiobooks. I've been listening to audiobooks since they were called books on tape, since it was a pretty new thing, not the multi-billion-dollar industry that it's since become. And the most important concept that I used when I started getting ready to narrate books myself is I just thought, what do I like when I'm listening? I should try to do that. And what don't I like? I should try to avoid that. And the reason I say that's a life lesson is because it's so easy to forget. People forget it in conversation and business and romance when they give public talks. I always think, like, what do I like when a public speaker, when there's a public, some sort of speech, what do I like and what don't I like? And then I just try to do the things I like and avoid the things I don't. So same thing with the narration. I like when narrators do voices, and I'm a pretty good mimic. So I thought, all right, so I'm going to try to do the voices. And then you get into deeper level questions like, okay, but how can I do the voices? Well, there's YouTube. You can listen to Australian accents or Spanish or Italian accents or Filipino accents or whatever and try to imitate it, mimic it, practice it, and get the voices dialed in that way. So that's how it started. At some point when Random House was my publisher, I was unhappy with the narration of, what was it at that point? I think I had 6 previous books and 6 or 7 books. Not because the narrators were bad. Some of them were great. Scott Brick is terrific. Dick Hill. I mean, these are some of the best names. But I have a series with a series characters. And for whatever reason, my publishers kept bringing in new narrators to narrate every book in the series, which is not ideal. Readers don't like it, understandably. So I got it in my head, I should just give this a try. Auditioned, and Random House was pleasantly surprised because most authors aren't very good at narrating. It's just a completely different skill. You might be a great writer, but you're not necessarily going to be a great narrator. It might be like you're great at chess, but does that mean you'll be a great basketball player? Maybe not. But I feel lucky in that I seem to be pretty decent at both.
Well, I mean, you have actually won awards, right?
Yeah.
Who issues these awards?
Well, I issue them actually, and it makes it really easy to win. The awards I've won, and I'm laughing when you ask me because I torture my wife Laura and our daughter Emma by telling them, did I mention that I'm a multiple award-winning voice talent? And they're like, oh my God. So there's a magazine called Audiophile Magazine, and they have several awards for audiobook narration, and I think I've won 3 times now.
Wow.
Yeah, it really makes me happy. I don't want to overstate it. It's not like digging a ditch. It's not like sweaty, backbreaking labor. Oh, actually, it is a little bit backbreaking to sit in a chair 8 hours a day for 3 days in a row.
Wow.
Without moving at all, like with your face this far from the mic, and you have every little sound, the mic picks it up. So it is a little hard on the body, but it's hard work, but I love it. And I just really enjoy it. Maybe there's a frustrated actor inside me. And when I get the kind of feedback I get on the audiobooks, it really makes me happy.
Well, we have been to a fair amount of your book launches at Kepler's, and you do always read from the book, and the audience always enjoys it.
Yeah, they seem to. It's fun. I mean, you just don't. The trick. here's one other thing. I lived in Japan on and off for 4 years. And one of the things I learned about Japan is, Laura and I figured this out. There's something they do that we call ritual humiliation, like bonding through ritual humiliation, which at first, if you don't understand, it's like, why are you making me do this? And then you realize, because everybody's going to do it, and we'll all embarrass ourselves, and then we'll bond as a group. It's actually kind of nice. And the first time I encountered this it wasn't karaoke. It was like I had to stand up in front of 50 strangers and sing a song. And at first I was like, oh my God, don't make me do this, because I'm a pretty good narrator, but I don't sing well. And somehow I just realized the only way you can screw this up is if you try to hold back and like protect your dignity or something. So instead I just belted out Frank Sinatra's Summer Wind. It was terrible, but everybody, the 50 strangers, thought it was hilarious that I got into the spirit. And I think narrating a book should be that way too. I mean, don't read it like it's an instruction manual and try to protect your dignity. It's like you got to feel like these characters. You got to bring them to life with the tone of your voice and and everything about your delivery. Otherwise, it won't work.
I don't want to dwell on the narrating part too much, but I would imagine that it helps to narrate the characters that you already have a feeling for.
Yeah. It's funny. So I don't know for sure because I've never narrated anyone else's book. There was one I really wanted to do, but they'd already chose a narrator. Don Winslow wrote a prequel to a book I love, and it was a big influence of mine, called Shibumi. I don't know if anyone here knows Shibumi by Trevanian. Many years later, Trevanian died, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that. But someone hired Don Winslow to write a prequel, which became known as Satori. And someone asked me to blurb the book, which I did because it was a great prequel. But I realized I would love to narrate this book, but they'd already chosen a narrator. I didn't get to do it. So I don't know what it would be like to narrate something that someone else wrote. It's easier to do your own book, I think, in the following sense, in the sense that, I mean, you just know the words so well. You don't have to read it 3 more times to familiarize yourself with it before narrating it. So there's that. I know who the characters are. I know how I like to deliver them. But it's funny, a lot of people, there are some misconceptions about audiobooks. I'm sorry, now I'm going on too much about audiobooks, but I love audiobooks, and it's weird to me that in certain circles they get a little bit of a bad rap. Like, one thing is, some people say, well, you cheated. Like, you didn't really read the book, which I do not understand.
I agree.
I mean, it goes into your brain. It goes into your soul. It doesn't matter whether your eyes are doing the reading or someone else's voice is doing it, and it goes in through your ears. It goes to the same places. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, people will sometimes say, oh, well, I don't want to hear the narrator's interpretation of that book. I want it direct from the author. And my response to that is, that's an impossibility, because you have your own filters, your own voices, your own cadences, whatever is going on in your brain. When you read that person's writing on the page, you're interpreting it. So I don't know what it sounded like when the author wrote it, when it was in her head or whatever, but you can't do that. You are mediating it yourself. If you listen to the book, you're just listening to someone else's mediation. And if that person is some sort of award-winning actor, stage actor, whatever, like Craig Wasson or Blair Brown or whoever, geez, they're probably doing a better job than you are in your own head.
Okay, so since you were in Japan, off and on for 4 years, as you said, is that where you got the idea for the John Raines series?
Yes. My wife and I were first living in Tokyo in 1993 and 94. I've always liked writing. I've always been pretty good at it, I think it's fair to say. I don't want to sound immodest, people who don't know me. I'm terrible at more things than we'll ever have time to talk about in any single podcast. But I seem to have been born with a certain knack for writing.
Correct.
So it's nice to thank you. All my jobs, I've always become known as the guy to go to if you need something written, a business plan, or marketing copy, or whatever. And I used to write short stories when I was a kid. I liked to take creative writing classes when I was in high school and college. So I've always had a knack for it. But it wasn't until Laura and I were living in Tokyo that this idea came for me for something that I thought could feel like a novel. And here's the other lesson that I think other people might find useful from my experience. What did it was, I have all these interests that some of which I like to refer to as forbidden knowledge, like things the government doesn't want citizens to be able to know, things the government wants only select individuals to know. And so I have a weird collection of books from companies like Paladin Press and the now tragically defunct Lumpanix Unlimited, all sorts of stuff about killing techniques, the Death Investigator's Handbook, weird ones like How to Start Your Own Country. I don't know if that's so related to anything I went on to write. And then I spent 3 years in the CIA, so I learned all the spy stuff, the counter-surveillance, surveillance, all the tradecraft, that kind of stuff. I've been into martial arts since I was a teenager. And in fact, the reason Laura and I moved to Japan, ostensibly so I could work for a Japanese law firm, but really so that I could train in judo at the Kodokan in Tokyo, the birthplace of modern judo.
Oh, wow.
And we were so electrified by that city. I was training in judo, and then together we were going to these wonderful whiskey bars and jazz clubs and coffee houses, and it was just such an overwhelming experience that when I look back, I realized Tokyo provided a kind of spark for a lot of dried tinder that I'd been laying down for years in my life without intending to. I wasn't thinking like, oh, I have to feed my imagination. I just have a lot of weird eclectic interests that I've indulged since I was pretty young. And in retrospect, I realized that stuff was building up in my mind like dried tinder, and Tokyo provided a spark. And one day when we were living in Tokyo, I was on my way to the office on the subway, and an image came into my head of two men following another man down the street in a part of the city called Shibuya, a street called Dogenzaka. Vivid image, compelling, didn't go away, stayed with me through the day, and I started asking questions about it. Who are these guys? Why are they following this other guy down the street? And then answers started to come. Oh, they're assassins. They're going to kill him. Well, why are they? What did he do? Who hired them? How do you become an assassin? The questions only led to good. They led to good answers, but the answers only led to more questions. And so the two lessons that I think one can derive from that experience, I didn't know it at the time, but in retrospect, I realized, one, if you want to be a writer, it's good to indulge your interests, your passions. If there's something you love and it just blows your hair back, just find a way to do that thing. And everybody's busy, and we all got to pay the rent, not necessarily with a job we love, but try to find time, even if it's only a little time, for what we generally think of as hobbies, those things you love, that you would pay to do and maybe do pay to do, instead of having to do the thing to earn a living. If you can do those things, it's really worthwhile. And then the other thing is, writing a story is really an iterative process of asking all those basic questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And if you're coming up with good answers, then you have to apply all those questions to the answers. And that is how you find your way into a story. Just keep asking those questions, keep subjecting the answers to those questions, and eventually the story will start to play its way out. And if you look at any story, what you'll see is at a high level, a story is just three things. It's who, what, and where. Who is the characters, what is the plot, and where is the setting? And what I would recommend to any writer or anyone who just loves stories and is interested in craft, go pick up your favorite novel or your favorite short story and just read the opening, and you'll see that what the writer is doing is spooling out critical information on who, what, and where. Some combination of those things. It might be a lot more of one than the other, but those three things are going to be in play. And what you'll see too is that the writer is always insidiously doing something at the same time she's parceling out that information. The information she gives you always makes you hungry for more. It's so insidious. They nourish you and they famish you at the same time. That's what good writing is. So I got to ground you in the story by giving you some critical information on who, what, and where, so you start to feel like, okay, the story's seducing me. I'm starting to feel like I'm in this. But at the same time, every bit of information I give you makes you curious, makes you want to know more information. And that's kind of the reverse side of the coin of making you question every answer you're given. You're given a little information, but it makes you hungry for more. Well, who is this? Who is this person in the story? Why is this person here? Why are we in a desert or on a mountaintop or in this boardroom or wherever the story starts? If you look for this, you'll always see it. Critical information to ground you in the story makes you hungry for more.
Okay, that's great. You were with Random House, and how many books did you have with them, and what was the reason that you took your books back? How did all that develop?
So my first 6 books were with Penguin Putnam, and then number 7 and 8 were with Random House Ballantine. Now I guess I can say they were all with the same publisher in a sense because it's whatever they call themselves.
Yeah, they absorbed
now.
them all.
They're not called Random Penguin though, and I'll never forgive them for that. They call themselves, what do they call them? It's not Random, it's Penguin Random House, right? Yeah, I'm like, come on, why do you have to take yourself so seriously? Life is short, it's a fun ride. Call yourselves Random Penguin. Nobody's going to think less of you for it. In fact, people will respect you for it, for being a little self-deprecating. And yet, okay. Anyway, so those are my first 8 books. And, well, it was, when did this all happen? St. Martin's had made a 2-book offer for my 9th and 10th book. It wasn't a great experience for me for 7 and 8 with Random House. No disrespect to Random House. It just doesn't always work out with between authors and, it's like life, friendships, marriage, whatever. Like, it just doesn't always work out. And it's not always that someone is to blame, but that just wasn't a good one. So I was looking for a new publisher. St. Martin's made a good offer for my next 2 books, which would have been, I guess, number 9 and 10. At the time, digital self-publishing was exploding. So this would have been around, I guess, 2009, maybe. Maybe I'm misremembering. 2010, I forget. I did something very unfamiliar and uncomfortable for me, which is I used numbers. I told you I'm terrible at more things than I can. I'm practically enumerate. But I looked at my sales for all my previous books, and I considered what I would make at 70% a digital unit, which is what an author keeps if you self-publish your books. And I just looked and I thought, again, no disrespect to St. Martin's Press, it was a very nice offer, but I just thought, I can make this much on my own at 70% a unit compared to the, say, 17.5% that they're offering me, 17.5% per unit in digital. My digital sales were exploding for the last 2 books. My paper sales were shrinking. So I started to think of myself as more a digital play. I've written and spoken a lot over the years about they're not so new anymore, but the expanded universe of publishing possibilities that authors now have. And I think expanded opportunities, an expanded range of choice for authors is fantastic. It's fantastic for everyone except publishers. Well, sorry guys. I'm much more interested in what's best for authors and ultimately what's best for readers than I am concerned with anyone in between, any middleman between authors and readers. That's the way I'm wired. I don't mean to put anyone down. So I realized that I was becoming a more digital author than I was paper. Not everybody's like that. There are many authors who have far more sales in paper. You got to figure out what's best for you. But I just realized that as my digital sales grow and my paper sales shrink, traditional publishers are going to have less and less to offer me, because I could go down this rabbit hole and you'll never get me to shut up. But just very briefly, what the bedrock, the foundation of traditional publishing has always been distribution. Paper distribution. The one thing an author could never get for herself was a cost-effective way of getting her books into the hands of a mass market of readers. To do that, you had to go through a publisher. And those publishers will charge you about 85% of your per unit revenues, because what they offer is an agglomerated range of services. So you want our distribution, which you can't get anywhere else, then you're going to get editorial, copy editing, proofreading, cover design, marketing. Some of these things are more theoretical than others, but you'll get a whole package, but it's not a la carte, it's prefix, and you pay 85% for it. That's the way. That's what I just described is publishing. Yeah. Self-publishing, you do it all yourself, but you keep 70% of the profits. And I just realized that was becoming a better deal for me. Yeah. So I don't know. I meandered. And then through some difficult negotiations, I wound up reacquiring the rights to my first 8 books from Penguin and Ballantine. And I self-published them, and then ultimately Amazon Publishing wanted to publish those books too, in addition to my new books. And so now I have published just about everything with Amazon Publishing and some self-published titles too.
Wow. All right. We got to take a quick break, and then we shall return with Barry Eisler.
Thank you to the City of Montessorino for their continued support of KCAT Public Media. The City of Montessorino has enabled KCAT to inspire, educate, entertain, and inform our community through the magic of television and digital media for over 38 years. Thank you.
Okay, we are back with Barry Eisler. I ask every author this question, and I've asked you this question before. I ask about whether there are any TV or movie studios interested in converting any of your books into movies or TV series or movies. Tell us a little bit about Keanu Reeves.
Keanu is awesome. He was attached to play John Rain at one point about, oh my God, it was, I can't believe the way the time goes. It was 8 years ago. And he was really into the books. The project fell apart. That's a cut to the chase for a variety of reasons. And the truth is, anytime somebody's going to make a movie or television show or your books, you should assume it'll fall apart. Statistically, it will. But if you're very lucky, it won't. But then you'll never be disappointed if it goes the distance. That's my advice to anyone who's ever been in this situation. Even, I know other authors who've got, I was like, Keanu's in. He seems really into this. So I thought our chances were really good, and they probably were good, relatively speaking. But I know authors who have, like Mark Kaseki, he's got a story about, they were ready to begin production with Will Smith on Marcus's book, Brilliant, and like Will just didn't show up, and he paid a kill fee. He changed his mind. I don't know. So until you're sitting down with the popcorn and the remote, best to keep your excitement in check. Keanu was awesome. The best part about that project was I got to meet him, spend 5 days with him in Tokyo and the rest of the people who were developing the show, and take Keanu Reeves and these other people around Tokyo, but John Rain's Tokyo. We specifically went to, John Rain's favorite places, which coincidentally are my favorite places, like all the kinds of places I was talking about a minute ago that Laura and I fell in love with, the coffee places and the whiskey bars, the jazz clubs, the Kodokan. We spent 5 days going to all those places, and it was so much fun. He was super into it. He either he has a really good memory and a super squared away assistant, or else the guy just actually likes to read. I think it's the second one, because he knew my books well.
Wow.
Yeah, I was flattered. I've heard a lot of things about Hollywood, like nobody reads there, but maybe most people don't, but some people do. He really knew the books well. So he's a delightful guy. I'll tell you one last thing about Keanu, because it really impressed me. Something related to Abraham Lincoln said, if you really want to tell if a person, like judge a person's character, don't give him adversity. Everybody gets adversity. It's not a bad way of gauging character, but it's not the ultimate way. The ultimate way is give a person power. And that has been my experience. When people think they have power, their behavior will tell you a lot about their character. And Keanu was so at pains to make people feel relaxed around him. You could see it. It's the only time I've ever spent any time with a certified movie star or any kind of star. And you could feel it. Like, people were like, it's Keanu Reeves in it. And he was just so at pains to not play that card and the opposite, to get people to relax. I was very impressed by that. I think it must be rare in this world.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, not just in the movie industry.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my time with Keanu Reeves. Good guy. And he would have been a great John Rain, but that one didn't work out. And yeah, there's some people, really smart, good, passionate people who are trying to set up a Rain television show right now. I think we've made some measurable progress. And I feel as optimistic as I've ever felt, which is not that optimistic, just because I've been through this before. You got to be sensible.
Yeah.
But I don't think we could have a better team working on the show, and that's all I can reasonably ask for. Here's another thing. Like, I always try to make these things, useful instead of just, here's an anecdote from my life, which who cares? But I think it's important to think in terms of things you can control and things you can manage, and then things that are beyond your control. In that third category, don't worry about it, because things happen and there's nothing you could do anyway, and those things aren't our responsibility. But sometimes when I'm talking about writing, getting published, or now it used to be getting published when there was only one route to reach that mass market of readers, but now there's self-publishing, which is available to everyone. So the challenge is not to get published, you can publish yourself. The challenge is still to reach a mass market of readers and maybe to write the best possible books you can, that sort of thing. So what I tell people is focus on that. Like, the one thing you can pretty much outright control if you want to be a writer is you can write. Everybody's busy, so you got to respect that, but you can find a little time, if not every day, then regularly. I mean, it's like working out. If you want to be in good shape, then okay, like, I'm not saying you have to work out every day. That can be a lot, but every other day, twice a week, something, because less than that, you maybe get into the it's not going to happen zone. So if you want to be a writer, then you got to write, and that is something you can control. Do that thing. If you can do an hour a day, that's fantastic. An hour every other day, all right, do what you can. 2 hours, 2 days, whatever works for you. But you can control that, and you must do that thing if you want to be a writer, because you can do it. And then things you can manage, and that has to do with the craft and other things like that. I mean, that's a longer conversation. But can you control whether you're going to be published or whether you'll reach a mass market of readers? I would argue that no, you can't. But the good news is, don't worry about it. It's out of your control. You can relax now and just focus on those things that you can control. You can manage that. Those things together make the uncontrollable thing more likely or less unlikely. Anyway, that's how I feel about this whole TV thing. I feel like we got a great group of people. They're smart. They're making the right moves. I feel like I'm contributing in a way that's helpful. That's all I can do. They're doing all the right stuff, so I don't have to tear my hair out. I have done that before when the development people were doing things that I didn't think were so smart. And that's it. So then I feel relaxed. I'm like, you know what? If it doesn't work out, the odds are hugely against us. And it probably won't, but it won't be because we did dumb things. Control what we can control, manage what we manage. That's our job, and we're doing it.
Well, for the 1% of our viewing and listening audience that doesn't know who John Rain is, he is half Caucasian, half Japanese, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And so Keanu Reeves seems like a pretty good fit for that kind of mix.
It's a challenging role to cast, because you need someone who visually is going to be half white, half Asian, and someone who is utterly fluent in both languages, and that's rare. I mean, my Japanese is decent. It's rusty at this point, but if you spoke to me on the phone, you would never think you're talking to a Japanese person. It's accented, and my grammar gets screwed up, and I can sound a little brain damaged at times, even if I'm making my point. Not that I'm proud of my Japanese. I worked hard at it, but John Rain's not like that. His English is like our English. It's native, but so is his Japanese. And that is not easy. I don't know if anybody recently watched Tokyo Vice. Good show, based on Jake Adelstein's memoir, which is great. By the way, I blurbed that book all the way back in 2009. I forget who sent it to me. I slightly know Jake. And I really don't like to blurb books for a variety of reasons. But I took a look, and then I started reading. I'm like, oh, this is really good. And I wound up blurbing it. Now it's an HBO series. It's funny. Life is funny. But huge props to Ansel Elgort, who learned really good Japanese, playing an American reporter living in Tokyo. I think around 1989 or so is when the show is set. But the thing is, he doesn't sound native. He's not supposed to. That is another level accomplishment. You just can't learn that. Like, oh, I'm going to learn my lines for a show. You can learn, if you have a good ear and you're a good mimic and you're really diligent, you can learn to speak Japanese. And again, Ansel Elgort did a brilliant job of it. He really sounded like a guy who spoke good Japanese from learning it in school and on his own, but he did not sound native. John Rain does need to sound native in both languages. And you can't sound native unless you really are native. So who will play John Rain? Challenging role to cast, but let's hope we find out.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that there are no financial rewards for being a blurber on a book that ends up becoming a movie or
so it's funny.
Or a series.
I'll keep my answer short, which is always a challenge for me. I'll just say this: financial rewards, no, but not direct. There's no direct payments, at least never that I've encountered. But it is log rolling. It's back scratching. It's like, I'll blurb your book, you blurb mine, or you do a favor for the publisher, and the blurbs get so inflated. Look, I've done this myself. I'm not proud of it, but occasionally I've just been in a position where politically I felt I couldn't say no. And it's not that I didn't like I will never blurb a book that I outright don't like. But many times you read a book and it's like, yeah, this is this is a pretty good mystery. It's adequate, and I forgot it when the moment I finished reading it, but it kept the pages turning. But you can't say that in a blurb. So it's always got, oh my God, I had a priapism, I started a new religion. It was like tripping and the universe and the gates opened up, And you have to say stuff like that, and it's all bogus. And it makes me sad because there's so much BS in the world already. I'm like, do we have to add to it? Isn't there enough without us? But that is not to say, I think my ratio of books that I genuinely loved and blurbed like from the heart compared to the few that I felt like, I just can't get out of this. I think I probably have as good a ratio as anybody in the profession, and probably better than most.
Okay. All right, let's talk about Livia Lone.
Okay.
All of your protagonists for the first number of books were male.
Yeah.
Livia Lone's story is unbelievable. So, anybody who hasn't read at least book 1 of that series, you should get it because
Thank you.
It's crazy good. How was it to write a female protagonist?
Such a good question. I'm struggling with how do I keep this answer relatively short. So Livia is really different than I am in a lot of ways, but so start with the high level maybe, and this touches on a lot of political stuff that's going on in publishing, which I don't really understand, I gotta say. But it has to do with the ever-shifting rules of what characters you're allowed to write and what you can get in trouble for. And I feel like unless you're writing a memoir, you're imagining characters who will be different from you in a variety of ways. If I came up with a character who's a 58-year-old straight white male from New Jersey, that'd be pretty close to me, and I wouldn't probably have to do that much research on it. But then everything else starts to become increasingly different from me. And then the question is, what do you do? And by the way, if anyone's curious, just by coincidence, I just posted something on my blog about this yesterday, specifically with regard to a character I created for my John Rain prequel, Graveyard of Memories, set in Tokyo in 1972. I wrote it in 2013. And it involves Rain's love interest in that story is a gal, an ethnic Korean Japanese citizen named Sayaka, who's in a wheelchair. She's paraplegic. And you got to be careful doing that for a variety. I think you have to be careful because you better do it right. But also because you can get in trouble these days, I think. Writing characters who are that different from your baseline. And those two things are connected. I mean, if you're going to do it, then you better do it right. The idea, I'm sorry, my answers are going to be all over the place, but so much of your question interests me. A few years ago, gal I'm friendly with who used to be an editor at Amazon, Jackie Ben-Zakari, she posted something on her Facebook page that I loved, and it was this. People might know about the Bechtel. I think it's called the Bechtel Test. It's this thing where you measure how much dialogue women have in a movie, and it has to be like, it can't be about their boyfriends, and it can't be about, I don't know, getting their nails done or something like that. Like, it has to be real substantive stuff. And if it's less than some percentage, then you've failed that test, and your movie, you might want to consider like it's too male dominated or something. And I think it's a good rule of thumb, but the thing about it is it's considered it. Two women came up with it, and it was supposed to be almost a joke. Like, this is the absolute baseline for what we can expect women to be able to do in a movie in terms of the percentage of dialogue. And many, if not most movies, don't even pass that minimal threshold. But Jackie posted this thing that said, here's another place where male authors could do better. Who are your background characters? You have a walk-on doctor, a police officer, or whatever, investigator of some kind. And do you always default to a man when you do that? Or is it always a white male? And the thing I loved about that post was, I loved the substance of it, because I'll admit it, I hadn't thought about this. But better yet, the tone of it. there was nothing that was like, hey you jerk, like you're screwing up, you're a racist or you're a misogynist because you're not including enough whatever. Because I don't think I'm those things, but I was falling short. And instead of accusing me of something I would not agree with, someone just said, you may be doing this unconsciously. Think about it. And I did think about it. And it opened my mind, and I've written characters who are much better as a result. Anyway, so I think that's a better way to be in the world. Instead of accusing someone of something they'll probably not agree with, and then their defense screens will go up, just suggest that maybe you're missing something. I know I was. So that post that Jackie reposted really it opened my mind and made me a better writer. I have a friend, a guy named Cameron, who's spinal bifida, big mystery fan and writer himself. And Cameron spent his whole life in a wheelchair. And at some point, he loves my books, which I'm flattered by. And at one point he said, Barry, why have you never done a character in a wheelchair? And the honest answer is, because I never thought of it. That's why. Why? Because I'm not in a wheelchair. It just didn't. I mean, I know wheelchairs exist, but it's not enough in my consciousness to have considered it. He's like, you should do it. We're not invisible. And I was a little embarrassed, but I was like, thank you. Let me think about that. And that was around the time I was thinking about the world of Graveyard of Memories, and Sayaka in a wheelchair made everything about that book so much better than it ever would have been. Their romance is so beautiful. I cried so much writing that book. I don't want to give any spoilers, no spoilers, whatever. But if anybody's curious, I've gotten some really nice emails over the years about that book. One was from a mother of a paraplegic teenager who thanked me for making Sayaka a sexual creature. She was like, you just made her like a person. Like, she's 25, Sayaka's 25. You just treated her like you would treat a human being. And she was so grateful for that, and I'm grateful for her gratitude. And then a few days ago, a guy who's in a wheelchair wrote to me about Graveyard of Memories, and he had some very nice. He said, either you are in a chair yourself, or you've really done your research. And no, it was that I've done my research. I take these things really seriously. But that was also really flattering. And I wound up posting his email and writing a blog post about what do you do if you're writing a character? Like, how do you approach it? Someone who's super different from you. The closer to you, the less research you need. The farther out, the more. All right, sorry. I know that was a bit of a meandering, shocking, I know, answer to your question about Livia Lone.
It's all good.
Livia is different from me. She's ethnic Lahu. She's a she. She's a major trauma survivor, and I've had grief in my life. I don't know if I'd say I've had trauma as such, but who knows where one ends and the next begins. But and she had a brutal formative traumatic experience, which was that when she was 13, she and her younger sister Nasan, 11, were trafficked from their Lahu village, ethnic Lahu, their Thai. They live in the Golden Triangle near the Laotian border. They were trafficked from Laos to America, separated, horribly abused. And then Livia spends in the book the next 10 years of her life, or longer, trying to figure out what happened to Nasan, to solve the mystery of what happened to her little sister. Livia's a cop. She's a Seattle PD sex crimes investigator who's not just investigating sex crimes, but she's avenging them. Livia is different from me in a lot of ways. This is the first time I wrote a cop. My characters previously were involved in CIA stuff and black ops, and I was never any kind of James Bond, but I did spend 3 years in a covert position in the CIA. So, okay, I know that world a little bit, and I was trained in the various whatever. So I feel like I've got some firsthand knowledge and experience in that world that I can bring to the page. But I don't know much about being a cop, so I did my usual thing there, like whether it's a wheelchair, being a cop, or Seattle. I mean, I visited Seattle, but how well do I know Seattle? So I went to Seattle, got an Airbnb place. My wife Laura, who's a literary agent, had a former client, a guy named Randy Sutton, who was former Las Vegas PD. Anybody who's seen the movie Heat, not Heat. I have Heat on my brain for a variety of reasons. It's Casino, also with Robert De Niro. There's a scene where Robert De Niro and Sharon Stone are having a big blowout in front of Robert De Niro's house. She comes to pick up her stuff, Sharon Stone, and they're having a fight. Cops show up. One of those cops is Randy in his moment of movie star. But anyway, Laura put me in touch with Randy. Randy said, well, I know a guy in Seattle. They'll give you a ride alone. Maybe you can interview some cops up there. Seattle PD was very welcoming. They were wonderful. I wound up interviewing a lot of homicide detectives there, sex crimes investigators, went on the ride-alongs. It was a great experience. Plus, I read all the books and did all the internet research and went to all the places I needed to go in Seattle. I went to Chiang Mai province in Thailand to see where did Livia grow up, and actually visited a Lahu village to just like feel like Livia. Visited the town of I forget the name of the real town. I call it Llewellyn in the book. I changed it because bad things happen there, but wherever, like where she grew up, her formative years. Like, this is what I do to try to get to know a character. Laura calls it method writing, and it does seem to work for me. This is how I got to know Livia, who in so many ways is different from me. But here's my advice, and I mentioned this in my blog post that I just was talking about, the one I posted yesterday. Here's a mistake I think a lot of writers make. They start with what's different about their character, rather than like informing whatever's going to be different with everything they already know about human nature. And there's a guy named Robert Mckee, who's a storytelling mostly in the context of screenwriting, but a storytelling guru who I think is terrific. I was just talking about Robert Mckee earlier with someone who's here in our studio audience tonight. And Mckee has the best framework I've ever come across for what you do with a character. How do I get to know my character? You have to ask a question, and the question isn't, what would I do? That's not the question. And the right question isn't, what would the character do? The right question, the right way in, is, what would I do if I were this character? And it's this weird alchemy. Now, however you phrase that, however you approach it, you might not like Mckee's formulation, but there's something like that going on. And I think a lot of times when writers do a character who's pretty different than they are, whether a different race or sexual orientation or nationality or whatever, they start with like, oh my God, I'm writing, for me it would be like the black character or the gay character or the lahu or the woman or whatever, and you get all bollocksed up thinking about the differences. Relax. We're so much more alike than we are different. It's actually tragic when you think about how much strife there is in the world because we think we're so different from each other, when in fact we have almost everything in common. So I always approach these differences in those Mckeesian terms by saying, like, what would this be like if I were this character? And that, for me, has always been the best rubric for creating a three-dimensional character. If you think too much about the differences, you're risking coming up with something two-dimensional. And if you don't focus on the differences, then you might get something bland. Shaping them in some iterative way is how you get rich, compelling, fully dimensional characters. I think, at least that's what works for me. So these are all the different ways that I got to know Livia. And I read a lot of books on trafficking and trauma and that kind of stuff. And I had one concept for Livia that became a kind of prism that everything else got refracted through, and it's this. Years ago, I read a terrific book by a guy named Dave Grossman called On Killing: The Psychological Costs of Learning to Kill in War and Society. And Grossman talked about this framework for three kinds of people, and that's obviously oversimplified. There are two kinds of people in the world: the kind that think there are two kinds, and the kind that doesn't think there are two kinds. There's always, three kinds. It's more of a spectrum. But Grossman's rubric is this: there are the sheep, which is most people, and they're harmless creature. They're not causing any problems. They just want to be left alone to graze and enjoy themselves. And then there are the predators, obviously, the wolves. And we know what those are too. They prey on the sheep. But there's a third class of human, and these are the sheepdogs. Sheepdogs have fangs like wolves, but in instinct not for predation, but for protection. And that is exactly how I thought of Livia from go. Actually, I shouldn't say from go. Laura's idea was, I was thinking Livia was an assassin. When we first started talking about Livia and who would this person be, I was like, because that's just how she's going to be an assassin. And Laura was like, she's not an assassin, she's a cop. And I was like, oh. This is on a drive to LA. I'll never forget this. People ask me where my characters come from. And sometimes I'm not sure. This one was that drive. And Laura saying she's a cop. Like, listen to me, Barry. Stop with the assassins already. So, but I still have my way, and I'm like, but can't she kill people in her spare time? which is what Livia became. Where we really focused it in was like, Livia is a born sheepdog. She is so hardwired to protect. This is how she is about her younger sister, Nassan, who she adores. What would happen to a born sheepdog if its instinct to protect was horribly interfered with by trauma? If that instinct got tuned by trauma to obsessive levels, well, the sheepdog might stop just guarding the sheep, might start going after the wolves. And that was that conversation Laura and I had on the way to LA. And I still get chills when I think about it. That's Livia. She's a cop, and if she can make the system work to get justice done, then she'll work within the system. But there are times when she can't do that. There are times when she doesn't want to do that, and she does it her own way.
Correct.
That's Livia. I love her, by the way. Sorry I talked so much about Livia. I mean, I love all my characters, but I wrote the first Livia book, Livia Lone, in a Seattle coffee shop. Tragic, it's gone now. Uptown Coffee on South Lake Union. But every day I was in there on my laptop with the earphones on, and people must have been thinking like, oh, it's that poor man again. Always crying into his laptop. Should we help him? I don't know. Maybe not. I cried so much writing that book. But last thing about Livia, or unless you want to talk about Livia more, which I obviously could all day. So Livia Lone, the first there have now been 4 Livia books where she starts overlapping with the Rain universe. All my books start to overlap, kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You can think of it that way. They just start to flow in and out of each other, and they all become one big universe in the end. Livia, I forgot what I was going to say about Livia, so it doesn't even matter. Whatever, that's Livia. Oh, here's what I was going to say about the first book. People think of it as a revenge story, which it is. I mean, Livia is obsessed with tracking 2 things. One is finding Nassan, or at least finding out what happened to Nassan, but then the other is revenge on the men who abused them both. And at a high level, Livia Lone is a revenge story, and there's a rich history of revenge stories, including like women's revenge stories. It's a thing. It's definitely a well-defined, genre with a reputable pedigree. I mean, assuming like Last House on the Left and I Spit on Your Grave, and like I'm assuming you, but and Peppermint and Enough. I mean, there's so many revenge like that genre. So it is. Livia Lone can be understood that way, but to me, really, Livia Lone is a love story. And you gotta, there's the spine of the story, and then there's the heart. And the heart of Livia Lone is about the unstoppable power of love. That's what motivates Livia. She will never give up until she finds Nassan, or at least finds out what happens to her. And that's what makes the book so beautiful to me.
That's great.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I have a few more questions. However, we want to take a couple of minutes for you to do a little reading.
Okay.
And then we'll take a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay.
Tell us all about what you'll be reading from.
Okay, so I have a special surprise. I hope it'll be special to you. I mean, it is by definition special because no one has heard it yet. This is an excerpt from my new book, Amok. Amok, if anybody knows my character Dox, former Marine sniper Dox, who's introduced in my 3rd book, Winner Take All. He starts off as part of the Rain universe, but then all my universes start to overlap, and Dox and Livia overlap in my book, The Night Trade. That's like a 50-50 book. Dox, I think it's fair to say, is probably my most beloved character, just judging from the kind of feedback and email and that sort of thing I get. So Amok is a Dox prequel set in 1991 The story's bookended in Tuscola, Texas, just outside of Abilene. The heart of the action takes place in East Timor. Now it's just called Timor. During the Timorese War for Independence from Indonesia. So I love this book. It's another beautiful love story. From the beginning of this book, if Laura were here, she'd be correcting my pronunciation, but I told Laura, I was like, it's a Bildungsroman. I don't even know how to pronounce it correctly. She used to speak German, or still does to some degree. Anyway, for anyone who doesn't know, a Bildungsroman is an education story. It's a story of someone, gaining an education, but it's obviously a pretty fancy term. So I love saying that I have written a Bildungsroman. That's what the story is. Dox goes from experienced, he spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, and then nearly 2 years in Afghanistan, Reagan-era Afghanistan, during Operation Cyclone, where the CIA was arming and training the Afghan Mujahideen, then known affectionately as the Mujahideen, later less affectionately known as Al-Qaeda. But so Dox has some serious training and combat experience, but he's still only about 25 years old, 26 years old. A lot to learn about the way the world really works, and the arc of his character is, in this story, is he has a major personal problem in Tuscola. His father's been in prison for I think 14 years or something like that, and he's about to get out. And Dox's mother and his sister Ronnie are scared to death about what their father is going to do when he gets out of prison. And Dox is caught between not wanting to keep his father, who went away when Dox was a little boy, and he still loves his father and doesn't want to keep him in prison longer because it's a hellhole, the Walls unit in Texas, the Huntsville unit. But on the other hand, he himself is a bit afraid of what his father's going to do. That's the whole background of the story. And in this scene, Carl is back in Tuscola, small town, and he's gone to Honky Tonk to meet a guy named George Whitaker, who himself is an ex-con and can give Carl. I'm sorry if I'm alternating between calling him Carl and Dox. His real name is Carl, and he's known as Carl in Texas. Dox is more an operational name, so here he's called Carl. He goes to this bar to find a guy who works there, who himself is an ex-con, and maybe can give him some information that'll help him make this difficult decision he has to make. But at the bar, he runs into some people from his youth in Tuscola, and I love this whole scene. I love what comes before it. I love what comes after it. But I'll just read for a few minutes. Does that work?
Yeah.
All right. Never done this from an iPhone before. It's usually a little bigger. Let's see if I can make it work. So Dox is now Carl is now inside this bar, this honky tonk, the Purple Sage. Picture crowded bar, sawdust covered dance floor, Texans doing the two-step, very lively, boisterous atmosphere. He strolled over to the bar, which was barricaded 3 deep, and managed to ease his way through the boisterous crowd. A television was playing in one corner, a Wildcats game, unsurprisingly. And there was none other than Marla Phillips, the gal who'd been his first that long ago night in the cemetery, tending bar. It was like the cherry on top of the sundae of feeling like he'd been shot back in time, and he smiled at the pun he'd made with the cherry reference. And just that moment, Marla looked over, caught his eye, and lit up in a surprised smile of her own. "Carl Williams," she called out, "of all the gin joints in all the world, get on over here and give me a hug." He was more than happy to oblige, though leaning across the bar was a little awkward. Marla solved the difficulty by snaking an arm around the back of his neck and planting a serious kiss on his mouth. Nessie, short for the Loch Ness Monster, who had been slumbering quietly until then, took the opportunity to stand bolt upright. She broke the kiss but didn't release his neck. "I've been hoping to see you." "I didn't know that, but I'm starting to figure it out." She laughed. "People have been saying you might be back, on account of your dad." He looked around, suddenly feeling he was in a fishbowl. "Is that right?" "Tuscola. Everybody knows everybody's business." "I guess that's another thing that hasn't changed around here." Yeah? What else hasn't changed? The band struck up Merle Haggard's I Think I'll Just Stay Here and Drink, and the crowd cheered. Carl shook off the discomfort of knowing people were talking about him. The music helped. The sight of Marla helped more. You, he said, taking the opportunity to look her up and down. No, forget that. You look better than ever. It was true, too. She'd been a slim cheerleader in high school, but she'd filled out nicely, and the cleavage he could see at the opening of her V-neck t-shirt made him want to look again, and then some. She raised her arms and gathered her hair back in a way that offered a delicious view of her body, then gave him a big, slow smile. Carl Williams, are you flirting with me? Just telling the truth. Uh-huh, you always were a sweet talker. Lord, it was like being 16 again. Damn if it didn't feel good. I don't know about that, he said, smiling. Now what's a fella got to do to get a beer around here? Someone from over to the left yelled, Marla, I've been waiting. And you can wait a little longer, she shot back. Then she leaned close and said quietly, Fella's got to tell me he'll stick around till I'm off tonight. Well, if Nessie had been at attention before, now it was more a matter of high alert. He nodded, feeling his heart pounding at the prospect. I'll stick around. She gave him about the sexiest smile he'd ever seen and popped the cap off a Lone Star long neck. In that case, she said, holding his eyes and waggling her head a little, this one is on the house. Someone shoulder checked him hard from the left. He looked, and there was Geber Scove, big as ever and twice as ugly, standing too close and smelling like too much beer. Carl Williams, he said more loudly than was needed given their proximity. So you're the reason I've been waiting so long. Marla took the Lone Star she'd just cracked and set it in front of Geber. Oh, Geber, you ain't been waiting that long. Here. Geber slid the beer over to Carl. I don't want his beer. I want my own. Carl was glad Geber had sent the bottle his way, because if there was one skill acquired by any Marine who'd been deployed on a Westpac float with port calls in Olongapo and Pattaya and endless carousing at the local nightclubs and bars, it was how to measure the distance from the base of the bottle of beer you were drinking to the head of the person who was annoying you while you drank it. Where's your brother? Carl said, his tone artificially cheerful. It takes two of you, as I recall. Geber gave him a menacing smile. Two's more fun, but one'll do the job. Carl lifted the bottle in a mock toast. I don't know, Geber. The way you say it sounds like you've been jerking off a lot. He took a sip and set the bottle down. But I suppose that's between you and yourself. Marla stifled a laugh. Geber's face darkened. Carl noted an old electric fan on the bar, from back when such things were made of steel rather than plastic. Listen, he said, holding the neck of the bottle loosely. Don't trouble yourself trying to think of something clever to say. I don't want to wait that long. I'll buy you a beer if you think you can be friendly. Otherwise, I'd rather be left alone. Geber frowned while his pea brain tried to figure out what was going on. Carl realized he wasn't afraid of Geber anymore, or of his brother Guppy for that matter. It seemed at least one thing had changed, and he was glad for it. I heard your murderer daddy might get out of prison, Geber said. That why you're back here? Carl took a deep breath and let it out. It couldn't be more obvious that Geber was baiting him, but that didn't mean it wasn't working. Way I heard it, Carl said, his fingers still light around the neck of the bottle. Doing some time might not be something you want to offer an opinion about. Glass houses and all that. Geber's mouth moved, apparently in the hope that his brain would kick in and give it something to do. If he so much as raised a finger, Carl was going to backhand the base of the bottle straight into his face. That would bring up the dimwit's hands and stagger him back, at which point Carl would snatch up that fan and brain him with it. Geber, Carl heard Marla say, why are you always trying to start trouble? Geber didn't answer. He just kept looking at Carl. But Carl didn't return the stare, because another thing he had learned in all those Westpac bars and nightclubs was to resist tunnel vision. The guy right in front of you might be the main problem, but you couldn't assume he was the only one. So while Geber's brain struggled to find a way to justify its own existence, Carl looked past him, and sure enough, there was the other brother, Guppy, moving in behind Geber. Good news, Carl said to Geber, while still watching Guppy. It looks like your partner's here, so you won't have to do it all by your lonely self tonight. Guppy frowned, then broke into a smirk as he recognized Carl. He threw an arm around his brother's neck and cackled. Carl Williams, look what the trash people forgot to take out. It seemed whatever restraint their frightened father had exercised over them had evaporated in the intervening years. Carl wasn't sorry. They'd had it coming since they were kids, and he was going to enjoy giving it to them. In his peripheral vision, he saw Marla signal someone. Bouncers, probably. Too bad. Can I ask you two a serious question? He said, looking from one to the other. Each of them frowned in concentration, but neither answered. Damn, they were like a couple of outfielders letting the ball drop because they didn't know who was supposed to catch it. Carl raised his left index finger as though emphasizing a point, which had the useful effect of obscuring that his right fingers had curled thumb down around the neck of the bottle. How is it possible, he said, squinting as though trying to solve a difficult puzzle, that the two of you have gotten even uglier since high school, and dumber, too? They both reddened, each probably hoping the other would know how to respond. Inbreeding, Carl said. That would be my guess. Am I right? Guppy said, Say that outside, asshole. Carl smiled. I'd be happy to repeat it anywhere you like, but would outside really give you the time you need to figure out an answer? Maybe we'd be better off making an appointment, say a week from now. Gieber, maybe feeling left out, said, You're dead. Carl smiled. I don't think I am. If I were dead, I wouldn't be able to stand here and keep telling y'all how dumb and ugly you are. Go on. Should have stopped already. Thank you.
Your reading was great, as it always is. Now we're going to take some questions from the live audience. The question is, how long does it take you usually to write a book?
Well, it varies, and the question's always a little more complicated than you'd think, or maybe than you'd think. The shortest interval I've ever had between two publication dates is 6 months. The longest is more like 2 years. I think in general you could say it takes me a year, but it depends on so many things. What I've found is if life really leaves me alone, which it never does, but I don't mean to complain. I mean, it's just, that's the way it works. And by the way, for any writers here, there's a terrific short book called The War of Art by a guy named Stephen Pressfield, who is himself a novelist, wrote an absolutely terrific novel called Gates of Fire. Oh my God. Anyway, Pressfield in his short how-to book talks about resistance as a reified force trying to prevent all artists from achieving their art, and it applies more broadly. It's just like anything you're really trying to do that's important to you, the world just gets in the way. So you got to watch for that. But if the world leaves me alone at a reasonable amount, I usually spend about 2 months really thinking about the book and researching it. I mean, you already heard what I did to get Livia right. That was a fair amount because just the fact that I was writing about police work for me was a lot. So that meant a lot of books, a decent amount of travel and interviews and ride-alongs and all that in Seattle. More research in that regard, and a trip to Thailand too, and I went to conferences on human trafficking. It was a fair amount of research, but on average, like 2 months of really conceptual work. I take a lot of walks. Laura and I Laura's really the unsung hero of these books because my name goes on them, but there is so much conceptualizing that we do together about who are these characters, what are their, and these are the questions we ask. And again, I think this is useful for writers, like who's the character? What were her formative experiences? With Livia, there's a fairly obvious answer, but like, what is her nature? What's her hardwired nature? And what were the formative experiences? What does she want? What does she think she wants? What does she really want? What's driving her? What is she aware of? What's driving her? What's beneath that? Like, what does she want? What does she really need? These are all questions that I think writers, I mean, unless you have fantastic instincts and you just know the answer automatically, which, hey, if you do, congratulations, that's not me. You want to ask these questions and develop the answers. And by the way, another thing I tell writers, like if your dialogue's not working, if it feels wooden, your problem is probably that you don't know the characters. And so you're forcing the dialogue rather than really feeling the character. Like if what I just read, if that sounded at all natural to you, I'm not fishing for a compliment here, but to the extent and if it didn't, that's okay too. Then you're like, well, it sucked, Barry. And I'm like, okay, then this point might not be for you. But if it felt natural, like this is a real guy talking, that's because I feel like him when I'm writing him. I just feel like I'm in his skin, and I don't have to think about what he's saying. It's not really serving a purpose. I'm not reverse engineering it. I'm just writing what Doc says. But to get to the point where you can do that, you really got to do a lot of conceptual work. You have to feel like those characters a lot. And that usually takes me a good 2 months, if not longer. And then, if not longer, really, probably usually longer. And then the actual writing of the book, once I've done all that hard foundational work, maybe 4 months, roughly. So the 4 months isn't that hard. Luckily now my publisher, Amazon Publishing, Thomas and Mercer, they know me, so they don't freak out if they're like, where are you? And I say, well, I've only written 20,000 words out of a 100,000 word book. It sounds like I'm only a fifth of the way through. But the truth is that foundation takes me so long. And the analogy is a good one, I think, because if you start trying to put up walls too soon, they're going to fall down. Or there'll be other problems that you're going to spend a lot of time trying to correct. Get the foundation right. It's boring. It's thankless. You're underground. You don't really see any progress. I mean, you're digging a hole and pouring concrete into it. Who wants to do that? But do that work. And then when the foundation is sound, it's amazing how fast and true the house can go up. That's been my experience. Anyway, as usual, a much longer answer than probably anybody was bargaining for. But anyway, that's how long it takes me.
Barry, do you have an opinion on the merger between Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster?
Oh, I never have an opinion about anything that's going on in the legacy publishing world. Yeah. It's funny, Laura and I were just talking about this morning. But I should say that all opinions expressed here represent mine and not those of my literary agent and collaborator. That's Laura. The thing to understand about New York publishing is that there's already almost no competition. Publishers get so upset when I talk this way. I almost wish they were here so they could offer some sort of rejoinder. I'm more comfortable with that. I am. I'm more like, look, you tell me how you see it. But this is the way I see it. What do they used to call themselves? It was the Big Six. Now it's the Big Five, right? Following the Penguin Random House merger. So the Big Five. What system that offers robust competition calls itself the Big Five? Is there one? I've never heard of it. I've heard of some things like this. The oil companies used to be known as the Seven Sisters. That was a cartel. When you start talking about the Big Five as a unit, you're talking about something that's functionally more like a cartel than it is a system of actual robust competition. And you can see this in the fruits of publishing. Why is it that every one of these 5 major New York players, all of whom we know compete fiercely with virtually no rules against each other? What an amazing coincidence that they all wound up paying their authors the same 17.5% digital royalty rate. That's an astonishing coincidence. I never would have thought that could have happened, and yet here we are, so maybe I'm wrong. Why is it that New York publishing is so characterized by such a singular lack of innovation? They pay their authors twice a year. Have you ever heard of any industry ever since maybe the 18th century, and even then I'm not sure because I'm not a historian, that pays its people twice a year? How is that possible? It's stunning. And the most stunning thing about it is that every one of the Big Five engages in that same practice. Another astonishing coincidence. I could go on about this, and many times I have in writing and keynotes and otherwise. So the most important thing to understand is, like, this is what you're going to get from the establishment press right now, which is itself not a robust system of competition, but much more insular than we're led to believe. You'll hear like, well, maybe this is dangerous, and the U.S. government is examining it, maybe opposing it on antitrust grounds. I'm not saying there's no reason for that. But don't start by thinking, oh, see, if they go from the Big Five to the Big Four, it'll destroy all the robust competition. I'm sorry, it almost makes me laugh to think about it. What it means is that the 3% of remaining competition in that system will be reduced to 2%. Or put in your own exact numbers. Is that a good thing? No, I wouldn't say it's good. But is it a move from, the naked jungle of capitalism and, tooth and bloody claw of competition to a cartel or an oligopoly or something like that? No, it is not that. It's a question of degree. There's already very little competition in publishing. If you want to understand the competition in publishing, think of it as kabuki competition. There are very strict rules and mores about what all these people who went to the same schools, intermarry, and go to all the same parties, they all recognize what are the rules, what are the mores, and they obey them. This is the way systems work, by the way. This doesn't interest me it does interest me particularly in publishing because of how I make a living, but it is in no means confined to publishing. And if you really want to understand the way the world works, you got to get past the distractions of, it looks like competition, it looks like a fight. Fights can have lots of rules. Look at a boxing match. You think like, wow, those guys are really tearing into each other, and sure, they are, with their 16-ounce padded gloves and rules against low blows. No weapons. There are rounds, no low blows. There's a referee. Boxing I've done a little boxing. It's brutal, but it is not like combat where anything goes. It's a different animal, and most systems are like this. And if you really want to see the ultimate example of this, welcome to U.S. politics, where we are inculcated into believing that we have two political parties. We don't. The overlap between the Democratic wing of the party and the Republican wing of the party is probably about 96 to 99%. If you look at what those two wings agree on, it's overwhelming. But we're inculcated to think that those two wings are actually two separate parties that offer a robust choice to the U.S. voter, the U.S. consumer. Not at all. They cooperate on so much more than they agree on. Think aristocracies, think oligarchies, think establishments. They may disagree on certain things having to do with the division of the spoils, but the one thing they always agree on, and they will fight to preserve, is they sit at the table and the rest of us get the crumbs. And if you threaten that, they will join forces to destroy you. That's the way systems work. Sorry, I got a little political there, didn't I? But those are my views on how much does the Big Five becoming the Big Four matter. I got more important things to worry about. The damage there is almost over. It just doesn't matter that much anymore. If eroding competition is the primary concern. Yeah. And sorry, I know a lot of people will violently disagree with what I just said, and I'm sorry we can't do it as a conversation because I don't mean to preach, and I'm wrong about lots of things. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I like these things to be a discussion to the extent possible, but this just isn't the format. But that's my opinion.
Yeah. When you are doing your narrating, how do you keep your voice fresh when you're there, as you said, 8 hours a day, 3 days in a row? Yeah, how do you do that?
Well, the most important thing is to practice by talking too much all the time. That's probably my secret. I think one thing is I'm just lucky. I seem to have, I don't know for sure, but I think people must have, like some people are just born to run marathons. I'm definitely not that, because they have naturally better stamina when it comes to pumping their legs for a long distance. And some people just can talk longer without their vocal cords starting to give out. And I think I don't really have anything to compare it to, but I've been told by the directors and engineers I work with that I'm able to go a long time, longer than other authors anyway they've worked with. I'm sure there are professional voice talents who can just go and go and go. So I think I'm just lucky to start with. And everything builds on that. And then the rest is I drink a lot of throat coat tea, and I keep a throat lozenge and tucked up in my gum. And that's pretty much it. Some voices are harder on my throat. Women's voices, weirdly, are harder on my throat. Gravelly voices like Carl's father, when you meet him, you'll hear him talking like this, and you abandoned me along with your mother and sister. That takes a toll. So, but throat coat tea and power through. That's it.
All right. I think that we are going to wrap this up now. I hope that the audience enjoyed it.
So it's like, right? Thank you. ...
I want to thank you for doing this, because I've been looking forward to this ever since you went to Half Moon Bay. And for those that don't know what happened, Barry was no, I didn't say that.
You didn't tell the audience to clap either.
But it's pretty obvious. Barry was supposed to come to the podcast late June, and just got a little mixed up between Los Gatos and Half Moon Bay.
Who among us?
So he was just convinced that Half Moon Bay was the right place. So it took a while to get him back, but it was worth the wait. So thank you very much for coming. It was fantastic to have you. And we're closing the book on today's podcast. I'll see you all next time.
You just heard Lit with Lloyd here on KCAT Radio. Explore all our KCAT original programming at kcat.org/radio.